Good afternoon. We will now be discussing the forces of managing change, Module 2. But before we do so, I'd like to refresh you on what the course is all about. This is a 4-module e-learning course to enable you to effectively manage change using the forces framework. We will be discussing the forces framework in each of the modules, and as you complete all of the 4 modules, you shall be able to prepare and implement a change management plan. By the end of this course, you shall be able to appreciate the value of managing change and prepare an initial draft of a change management plan. That was what we did last week during the first module. For this module, our specific learning objective is to identify, select, and schedule appropriate interventions that will build capability to implement change. For the succeeding modules, we shall also learn to implement the change management plan by properly communicating and collaborating with stakeholders and monitoring the implementation of the change management plan and sustaining the progress towards achieving your change objectives. Given this, our outline is patterned of the forces of managing change, which has 4 stages. The first one is on committing to change. Second is capacitating for change. Third is contributing and collaborating for change. And lastly, celebrating and continuing change. The committing to change module was discussed last June 19. Today we will be discussing module 2, capacitating for change. Then we will move on to module 3, contributing and collaborating for change on July 3, and then celebrating and continuing change as our last module on July 10. So we will now move to capacitating for change, and our objectives for this particular module is for you to be able to appreciate the value of building capability to implement change, explain and select interventions to build capability for change, and prepare the second part of the change management plan that will build capability for change. And our outline is the value of building capability for change, interventions to build capability for change, and planning the change interventions. Let us now look into the forces of managing change, which, as I have mentioned earlier, has 4 stages of committing to change, capacitating for change, contributing and collaborating for change, and celebrating and continuing change. For committing to change, we need to involve people to create ownership and commitment. We cannot develop commitment among people unless we involve them so that they will own this change project. Now, for capacitating for change, we need to build capabilities to implement change. Of course, if we will be introducing changes, these changes will entail certain practices or processes that may be different from what people are now doing, and people may not be capable of doing these things unless we build the capabilities for them to be able to implement this change. The third stage is contributing and collaborating for change, and during this stage, we need to lead people to work together for change. Usually, when we implement change, it is something that is broad and wide, so much so that it will involve people working together to implement the change. And lastly, of course, if we want to make sure that we will be able to sustain change, we need to celebrate and continue change. And we do this by embedding practices into culture to sustain change. So, given all of these modules, we need to prepare a change management plan. And for the first module, or the first stage, we prepared a communication plan. We identified the stakeholders that will be involved. in the implementation of the change, and we crafted some communication approaches so that we will be able to involve them, and we will be able to make sure that they will commit to change. Second, we need to identify action plans that will build capability for change, and that's still part of the change management plan. For the third module, or for the third stage, we need to prepare a risk management plan so that as we go along, as we implement the change, we are sure that we will be able to implement it properly. And as we go along, we move to stage 4, which is celebrating and continuing change. Here, we need a monitoring and evaluation plan. Now, before we move on, I'd like you to view this video.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels, every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. Okay. All right, just a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, all right, give it a go. Just give it a go. Wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. Go. And go. Oh, go! Alright, back up. Okay, wait. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right on. Wait. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Handles on. Yeah, come on. Alright, one more time. Okay.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike, and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So in how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult. It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child. All right, today's bike log. I can ride smooth, I can ride fast. I'm thinking the experiment is over. Okay, now I'm in Amsterdam, a city that has more bicycles than people. The question is, can I ride a normal bike now? I mean, I've spent all this time unlearning how to ride a bike. If I go back and try to ride a normal one, will my brain mess up? So I've tweeted a Smarter Everyday meetup, if you will, and I'm gonna see if somebody brings a bicycle and I'm gonna try to ride a normal bike. It's backwards, it's backwards. This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I proved is that I could only redesignate that bias. So what you're not seeing is just a group of people here looking at me, looking at the strange American that can't ride a bike because they think I'm dumb. But I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned. All right. After 20 minutes of making a fool out of myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment. I got it. I'm back. Oh, it clicked. Hold on, it clicked. I got it. Okay, there it is. There's the moment. Okay, I can ride a bike. I tried to explain this to the people around me, and they just didn't get it. They thought I was faking the previous 20 minutes, and I couldn't get anybody to believe me. That looked like I faked that, didn't it?
Yeah. Just a fake.
You think I'm faking. You don't believe me.
That looks so weird. You were like, la la, and it's full.
You think I'm lying, don't you?
I do.
I'm not lying. I felt like the only person on the planet who had ever unlearned how to ride a bike, and I couldn't articulate it to anyone because everybody just knew that you can't forget how to ride a bike. So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not. I'm Destin. You're getting smarter every day. Have a good one.
Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that we learned so much from the video. As we've seen from the video, they changed the way you maneuver the bicycle. No, when you turn left, it turns right, and when you turn right, it turns left. No, so this is something different. This is a change. But as we can see, even if people are committed and they really want to drive the bicycle properly, even if they know that something changed, it cannot be done automatically. People will need to build skills, no, so that they'll be able to drive the bicycle properly. And as you build skills, it does not mean that just by learning or knowing, being able to acquire knowledge is enough. We need to practice the skills so that we will be able to drive the bicycle properly. And so implementing the change will require people to do things differently. And as we do something differently, we will require also different competencies. We need to develop the new competencies that will be required by the change that we are introducing. As we discuss changes, we often hear the word unlearning. and relearning. And sometimes we just make use of these words lightly, but as we can see again from the video, it requires much effort. It will take time. It will take much time before we are able to unlearn and relearn something. So for us to be able to build capability for change, there are three approaches that we can use. The first approach is structural. The second is technological, and the third is behavioral. For structural, we need to implement changes in structure so that we'll be able to lead change properly. And then as we lead change properly, we need to orchestrate change, and we need to monitor and evaluate change. Why do we need to lead change? No? Many organizations, they just introduce change and then they leave people, no, to cope with the change without leading them, without trying to determine what should people be doing next and who should be doing certain things. So we need to identify a person or at least a group, no, to take the lead in introducing the change. And as they are leading, there is a need to orchestrate, because several stakeholders, several people will be involved in implementing the change, and somehow all of them needs to be orchestrated. There are also times when we introduce change, and then just after introducing them, we expect change to happen already. But what really needs to be done is we need to monitor and evaluate change. As we have learned from the video earlier, we need to practice. And as we practice, we need to find out, are we doing things properly already? Or do we need to continue building competencies so that we'll be able to cope with the change? Okay, so what are some of the forms that we can use, no? So that we can support structural change. One is identifying a change champion or a process owner. This is an individual vested with the responsibility of installing and ensuring that the change is sustained. And so that person will be responsible for planning and implementing everything that is needed, not to implement the change. But to support him, we need to also create a committee or a technical working group. You know, whenever we implement change, there are so many things that will change, and there are so many aspects that we need to look into, that just one person will not be enough. We need a committee, and we need the committee to be multi-skilled or having different perspectives, so that we can look at change broadly as we implement it. And third, we can think of centralization or decentralization within a formal organization. You know, we can incorporate the changes, the things that we will be doing differently, no, in a centralized organization, or assign different organizations, no, in a decentralized manner. So we can also make use of the formal organization. Third form is adding or deleting units. Now we can, for example, if we need to do something differently or something new, then we can either incorporate it in an existing organization, or we can add a new unit that will take care of these new responsibilities. Or because of the changes, there might be certain functions that we no longer need to perform, and therefore we can delete certain units. In terms of the forms, change champion and process owner, and the committee or the technical working group are minor changes in structure, while centralization, decentralization, adding and deleting units are considered major changes in the organization or in the structure. Now, aside from the structure, we also need technological approaches, not to build capability for change. So we need to identify what will improve what you're doing. So if we need to do something differently, what is it, no, that will improve what we're doing? For one, we can think in terms of design. Like for example, in this case, as we are now starting to introduce webinar into the bureaucracy, the design of this particular program is very, very different from a face-to-face uh, from a face-to-face intervention, like a classroom training. No, for example, during classroom training, we can hold it for a day, 2 days, 3 days, or even several days or weeks. No, but for webinars, people will not be able to sustain attention if they're just watching a webinar, and therefore usually we can only provide a very short intervention. Like in this case, we're providing you with a 1 hour um, learning intervention, but we expect that from this 1 hour you'll be able to prepare something already, like the change management plan. And as you do this, then you will learn more from the webinar. So we can change the design of products and services, or we can also change the methodology of providing those products and services, or creating those products and services. We can also think in terms of changing processes or even the tools that we're using. So as we change, no, these things, this is what we call the technological approach to building capability. Because as we change methodologies and processes, then we will be able to produce more or better products and services. So aside from technological and structural, there is also the behavioral approach. And usually this is the most common approach that those going into change use. No? And the rationale for behavioral approach is for us to be able to change the design, the methodologies, tools, processes, and materials. No? And as we create these designs or the methodologies, we need to also use a different skill or different competency to do this. Also, there might be changes in responsibilities. As we introduce changes in the structure, there will also be changes in responsibilities. And with changes in responsibilities, we will be requiring also changes in competencies. And lastly, as we go into changes, there will also be changes in relationships within the organization. So we need to build capability by changing behavior of the individuals involved. What are some of the forms of behavioral approach? First is the classroom training. We can train people so that they'll be able to develop competencies. But we must be aware that competencies are not developed through classroom training. We can provide them with concepts, we can provide them with knowledge, but in the end, after the classroom training, they need to practice or apply whatever they learned so that they'll be able to develop the competencies properly. We can support behavioral capability building through general assemblies. Through general assemblies, we can have learning sessions on a regular basis so that we'll be able to address certain gaps in what we're doing. Or even during general assemblies, we can raise issues and concerns that can be solved so that we can continually improve what we're doing. A third form of a behavioral approach is coaching and mentoring. So even after a classroom training, as individuals are now applying what they learned, they need to be coached and mentored so that they can do this properly. No? They can apply the concepts properly. Fourth is using work improvement teams. Work improvement teams are teams, usually cross-functional teams, that look into problems that they usually encounter at work, and then they go through certain processes, no, to look for the best solutions to this problem. And as they look for solutions, they learn much, no, from that process. And lastly, we can also change behavior through rewards and recognition, no? Trying to identify the desired behavior that we would like to see as we implement the change, recognize them and reward them so that it can be reinforced. So we have discussed structural, technological, and behavioral approaches for building capability for change. Now, knowing this will not be enough. We need to plan the intervention so that we will know how to build the capabilities as we introduce the change. If you will remember, in our last module, we look into the nature of change. We look at the background, the change objectives. You know, we want to be able to identify what is it that we expect, the change to bring about. Those are the change objectives. Then what are the environmental factors that influence change? And lastly, who are the stakeholders and how should we communicate with the stakeholders? So we were able to discuss, and I'm sure that you'll be able to prepare this part. I'm sure that you'll be able to prepare this part of the change management plan. Now for this module, we will look into action plans. And under the action plans, we will look into the change interventions. What is it that we need to do to build capability? We will also look into resource requirements, because capability per se will not be enough. We need to support the change that we are implementing. Then we need to look into monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, sustaining change. How do we make sure that as we achieve the change that we would like to implement, we will also be able to sustain them? So given that, let's think in terms of the change intervention with respect to the structural, technological, and behavioral approaches. What, who, or when to take actions. So we actually provided you with a sample of a change management plan. And on page 7, we have the matrix on action plans, especially on change interventions. We have 4 columns. One is the action. What is it that we need to do to prepare for the implementation of the change? Who will perform these actions when? And on the 4th column, we need to identify the success factors or success indicators so that we will know that we were able to perform these factors properly. So, for example, in the change management plan that we have given you as an example, the first action is to create an ad hoc team to study, recommend, and implement the project. So remember that one of the approaches to building capability is structural, and part of the structure is an ad hoc team, that will implement the e-learning project. We have identified who will take care of this, and then by when. But what is more important is also being able to specify how do we make sure that the team that was created was successful or is a successful team. So part of the success indicators we identified is that the team has clear objectives and expectations. We do not just create a team, identify the members, and then just tell them what needs to be done. We need to clarify the objectives. What is it that they need to achieve, and what are the expectations as they perform their responsibilities as a team. So that's one success indicator, having clear objectives and expectation. Another success indicator for creating an ad hoc team is that the team members are excited about the project. How do we make sure that the team members are excited about the project? Then we need to identify or select the members who are competent on what needs to be done and who are also passionate about the project, that they really want to implement the project. And so this is an opportunity for them to do something differently, and that should excite them about the project. The third success indicator is the team is able to come up with practical recommendations. Again, we need to identify team members who are competent so that they can think about the project very, very well, and they'll be able to come up with very good recommendations. No? We do not want to create a team that are yes men, that just follow what needs to be done without thinking. We need a team that will think for themselves, plan for themselves, and implement for themselves. Another action, the next action here, is that there is a need to orient the team on the project. And we identified the who and the when. Again, what is more important is the success indicator. So how do we know that we are successful in orienting the team? Well, if the team appreciated the need to implement the project, then we know that we gave them sufficient information and rationale about the project. Or if the team has, another indicator is the team has clear expectation of what needs to be done and how they can help each other. So there can be a leveling of expectation within the team, and they can also prepare plans so that they will know what to expect from each other. So these are the ways of these are some ways of how we can prepare a change intervention, and we need to do this sequentially so that even before we introduce the change, we would have already made the necessary preparations. Okay, so after identifying the action plans that we need to implement to build capability for change, then we need to identify the resource requirements in implementing each of the action plans. And for us to be able to do that, we need to determine specific requirements. Like, for example, workforce. How many people do we need to perform certain things that will be related to the project? Another is facilities and equipment. Do we need to provide them with an office, or a work table? Or third is materials and supplies. What materials and supplies do we need so that we'll be able to implement the actions properly. The fourth and the last requirement may not necessarily be related to monetary value, but it is something as important, and this is lead time. And usually actions fail because we were not able to provide the proper lead time for people to perform certain things so that we can prepare for the change to be implemented. Given this, then we can determine the budget requirements by monetizing, no, the value of these different resource requirements. Then we can move on to monitoring and evaluation. If we will go back to the action plans that we have prepared, we identified 4 columns. The first is the actions to be taken. The second is who will perform the actions. The third is when. The fourth is the success indicators. We can add another column, and we can use it for our observations, so that as we now implement each of these actions, then we can write down specific observations, no, of how the actions were implemented and what were the effect of those actions in terms of introducing the change or implementing the change. We can also indicate as part of the observation when were the actions taken. So when we plan the action, part of it was when to perform it. But as part of monitoring, we should also indicate when was it actually implemented, so that we will know if we are within the target project timeline that we have and that we have prepared. So that's what we need in terms of monitoring and evaluation. Just add one more column to the action plan. And lastly, we can think in terms of sustaining change. We can sustain change by embedding this into the culture. Let's evaluate actions. So if we planned to do certain things and we were able to implement this, what were the effect of those actions? Did it support the change that we are introducing, or is it contradicting the change that we are introducing? So we need to evaluate the actions taken. Were they effective or not effective? Second, if they were effective, then we need to celebrate success. Because even small things, as we do properly, we need to celebrate so that we can reinforce the change that we would like to introduce. And celebration excites people, energizes them so that they can move further along with the change that we would like to introduce. And as we celebrate success, let's also recognize the contributors, no? Who were able to change the behavior towards the desired behavior we want to see, who were able to contribute to the bottom line or to the results that we want to achieve. Let's recognize and award these contributors. And lastly, as part of embedding the change into the culture, let us also document the policies and the programs that will govern the change that we are introducing. Because as we document the policies and programs, then we make sure that we make it already part of our day-to-day lives in the organization. Also, aside from documenting policies and programs, we can develop habits. As we have seen in the video about the bicycle, even if we already know that we need to maneuver the bicycle differently, we are preventing from maneuvering it properly by old habits. You know, automatically we perform certain actions because of um, uh, the old habits that were in place. So let's practice and make sure that we are able to develop and manifest the new habits, that will be required by the change. We know this is already a habit if we are already able to perform the desired behavior without thinking about them. We are able to perform them automatically. So, we have discussed, we have completed Module 2, and if we will go back to the forces of managing change framework, in Module 1, we were able to discuss committing to change. In this module, we discussed capacitating for change. For the succeeding modules, we will be discussing contributing and collaborating for change and celebrating and continuing change. Last week, we were able to prepare a communication plan. This week, we prepared action plans together with the resource requirements needed to implement those actions. Next week, we will look into risk management plan, and after that, we will look into monitoring and evaluation plan. So this is the whole framework of the forces of managing change. By the end of the 4 modules, we hope that you'll be able to already prepare a whole change management plan and be able to implement it. Thank you.